Welcome back into another episode of Rock Boys Football. Last episode, we went over who our Heisman prop bets were. So we kind of talked about who our Heisman Trophy winner was and some good value picks. Today's episode is going to be a Big 12 preview. So we'll give you guys who we think are going to win, some dark horse picks, and then some players and teams to watch as well. Before we get into it, we want to thank everybody for the support again. And if you guys like the content, go hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. That helps us out a lot. And so without further ado, we're going to jump right in. Dill, who do you got winning the Big 12 this year?
So I think similar to how it was last year, I think we really have two teams that emerge as the two teams that appear to have a fairly good shot of winning this. And I would say that's Oklahoma and Iowa State now. Matt Campbell has really turned that program around. Shout out to him, and he's sticking around for a few more years. Or well, apparently he is. I don't see how he plays that contract out, but they did extend him for a fairly long time. So it does look like Ames, Iowa may have a solid program on their hands for the next few years. Now, this year, I do think they're returning a fair amount of guys from a very good team last year. So I am looking forward to watching them. And obviously, Oklahoma, as usual, is going to bring a very strong football team too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like looking at the Big 12, I think there's two front runners, and you talked about them a little bit both. Oklahoma's the favorite. I think if I was gunned ahead, I'm taking Oklahoma, but I think Iowa State can give them a little run for their money, and I'll tell you why. It just seems to me when you watch the film of last year and when you think about how they line up for this year, the stars are just lining up for them. They're returning almost every player from that team last year. I think they lose one guy on their defensive line and then one guy from their secondary. But other than that, on offense, they're returning all five starters and they'll get Trevor Downing back. So looking at that offensive depth chart, you got Brock Purdy at the helm, who's very, very solid. Breece Hall is maybe the best running back in the country. I know a lot of people have him to be the number one running back drafted.
He's solid, but like maybe pump the brakes on best. Like I think he's a decent player, but
yeah. No, I guess I should say of the draft eligible running backs, I see him mocked as the best running back. Obviously, Bijan Robinson.
That might be fair, yeah. Because some of the young guys are very good, honestly.
And I love
running backs.
I love Breece Hall's game. Like when you watch the film on him, he's 6'1", but his contact balance is tremendous. I think he broke like 68 tackles last year, which is pretty rare for a guy who's 6'1", to keep his balance and run through tackles like he does. And I love just that like one cut burst. So he just sticks his foot in the ground, gets going upfield. And that's why you see him hit those home run balls, because he doesn't really dance around. He'll just take one cut, get upfield. And he ran behind a pretty shitty O-line. That offensive line was not good. You saw it against Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship. But they're returning all their guys and getting another guy back. And so I expect that unit to be a little bit better. I expect Breece Hall to get a little bit more space. And I mean, I think Breece Hall is running for 1,500 yards this year. He's just an absolute workhorse.
So in regards to Iowa State on offense, I am with you. I do think Breece Hall is very good, and they did have a solid running game. And although I don't really see Brock Purdy as like a playmaker exactly, he does run the read option at a fairly high level, and he is a decent athlete, albeit he's not. I wish he'd make more plays in the pocket and be a little better at getting out of trouble, because that offensive line is not good enough, and he will take some sacks. So I wish he had a little bit of that. But in regards to that passing game, yeah, they have a very strong tight end in Charlie Kolar. But I do wish that they proved a little more on the edge. I think Xavier Hutchinson is coming back as a solid player, but he doesn't excite me. And I do think they need somebody to pair up and put a little threat on teams on the outside, because really they rely so much on the tight ends, and they are losing Shaner. That's his name, right?
Yep.
They're losing him. So they lost him, and they're getting Kolar back, who's probably a little better, but again, Shaner was a super productive player, so losing him hurts, especially when I think that they're not replacing him at the tight end spot, and they really don't have much proven at the wide receiver spot either.
Yeah, I agree. I think the one thing that is kind of a question mark is who's their number 2 wide receiver. When we were watching film last night together, we kind of disagreed on Xavier Hutchinson. I think he's got a little bit more playmaking ability than you give him credit for. I think he's the second leading. Let me look. Yeah, he's going to be the second most receiving yards returning in the Big 12. That's behind that Texas Tech kid. And so I think he's long. I think he runs good routes. He has a good catch radius. I like him. I wish they had a better 2. I mean, Tariq Millen had kind of like an injury-filled season, but we'll see what we can get out of him. But yeah, they do rely on their tight ends. That's how they do. They did a lot of 3 tight end sets, trying to use Charlie Kohler, Chase Allen, and those guys. So that's kind of how their offense works. Do I wish they had a better wide receiver 2? Yes, but I still think that offense is going to be really, really good in 2021.
Yeah, I think it'll be good. I agree with you. And then on the defensive side, I actually love that unit. And I generally despise the 3-4 system, especially when you're dropping 8, which I'd say they blitz very seldom for playing the style of defense they play.
Yeah.
But that defensive line, in credit, they play very hard and they do get after the quarterback. So if you have 3 guys who are all 3 going to be super competitive, rush very hard, and you can manufacture a little bit of pressure and drop 8 into a zone every play. It did seem to cause some problems for Oklahoma last year and some of the other high-fluting passing teams. So again, you're returning that pretty much that whole unit. And I don't know, as much as I dislike the defense they play very good defense.
Yeah, they actually get tremendous production from. Normally when you look at like a 3-4 defense, those D linemen don't really get much production because it's just kind of hard to rush the passer at an effective level with a 3-man front. Will McDonald had 10.5 sacks from the DM position for Iowa State. I mean, that's incredible number considering they really didn't blitz. Like a lot of those sacks came off like a three-man blitz up front.
Exactly.
They can get after it, and it helps so much when you can drop 8. I mean, looking back into that secondary unit and linebackers, Mike Rose might be probably the most productive linebacker coming back. He had, I think, just under 100 tackles, but he had 5 interceptions, which is absolutely crazy for a linebacker. I mean, he just drops into and gets in those throwing lanes really well. He's a really smart linebacker. He has good instincts, and having him come back for another season is going to be big. They actually get all those linebackers back. So Jay Cumlow's coming back and Orion Vance. And so
I like that crew for sure. I'm
it's a
with
productive
you.
unit. Yep.
Now, when I look at that back end, I don't think it's great. I think it's good. It's not like a total liability, but they do give up some big plays. I think Oklahoma burned them a handful of times on deep balls. So you'd like to think they share that up a little bit, especially if you're dropping 8, you'd like to think you're not going to give up as the amount of big plays that they tended to give up. So
yeah.
I don't know. They might be a little exposed on the back end, but it really wasn't bad. They played for a Big 12 school. They really did seem to play fairly good defense. So, yeah, they certainly will be a threat to the incumbent favorite, who I would agree with you is Oklahoma. Now, if we want to get into them, of course, they probably have the most talented quarterback coming back. I know we disagree a little bit. I don't think their skill players are as good as Oklahoma's had in the past. Now, obviously, Mims is coming back and he's phenomenal, but they have 2 other guys in Weiss and Hazelwood who, granted, Jaden Hazelwood should have all the talent in the world and that he for sure could be a huge impact player this year. He wasn't last year, but I don't know. Weiss didn't show me enough for the amount he played, and I don't love the tight end Stogner. So I do have a little bit of concern at what they're going to have as pass catchers, especially when an Oklahoma team that with Lincoln Riley loves throwing the ball. So,
yeah, I mean, I do agree that Jordan Hazelwood and Theo Weiss, I think Weiss was injured. He was banged up a little bit. But, yeah, they didn't really – it's Jadon, I believe, Hazelwood. Anyways, they didn't really like –
Jaden.
Jaden?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Marvin Mims was obviously their one. He was spectacular for a true freshman. Probably one of the best true freshmen in the country. The thing is, I'm not too worried about that offense. I think Spencer Rattler's going to make it happen. The level of football he played to close out the season was tremendous. I think he had 4 turnovers against Kansas State, 3 interceptions and a fumble, I believe. After that, he only threw like a couple interceptions the rest of the year, and you can see that in the results. They ran the table, didn't lose a game. And so that was after Kansas State and after Iowa State. Spencer Rattler showed some serious improvement at the running back position. They get Kennedy Brooks back, who was going to go to the NFL, decided to stay, and then Eric Ray comes in from UNC. Those guys are going to be a really, really good duo at Oklahoma in the Oklahoma backfield. So I guess to round out what I'm saying is I'm not worried about this offense. It's still going to be one of the best offenses in the Big 12. But what makes me so intrigued about Oklahoma and makes me want to pick them to actually win a national title this year is what's been holding them back every single year. It's their defense. This defense, at least this defensive front, is absolutely loaded. I mean, I love Isaiah Thompson and Perrion Winfrey. You saw Perrion Winfrey just handle Iowa State up front. And he was a one-man wrecking crew, getting in the backfield pretty much every play. You had Isaiah Thomas, who I believe had 10.5 sacks last year, and then obviously Nick Benito from that edge, that like linebacker edge position, is going to be maybe a top 15 pick coming back next year in the draft. So that defensive front is loaded, and I'm really excited to see what they can do and help this team maybe win a national title.
I'm totally with you on that front. I mean, that's 4 guys who all showed a very consistent ability to win pass rushing downs and be super disruptive in the run game, because there's no like space eating big guys in that group. They're all fairly lean, very athletic for defensive linemen, but they don't get pushed around and bullied. So I'm with you. That defensive line in particular is very good. Now, I do think they're going to have a major problem at linebacker, because I didn't think it was a great unit last year. And I don't know. I really don't love what they have coming back, because they are losing their starting middle linebacker, and he was a productive player for them. So I do think their secondary will be fairly solid, returning both safeties and cornerbacks who played fairly meaningful minutes, and we're pretty good. But I do have some concerns, especially when you think they're going to have to play in Iowa State. I'd like to think that linebacking crew can stand up, but I don't love it, and I don't think it was good enough last year, and I don't see necessarily why it'll be particularly much better.
I feel your concern. I think when you look at a linebacking unit, I think a lot of their problems, it's probably the worst unit on the football team, right? But when you look at how good their defensive line is, that's going to help cover up them linebackers. When you have a defensive line that's just handling double teams, getting in the backfield, it makes the linebackers' job a lot easier. And so I expect the linebackers to not really be a problem, because this defensive line is one of the best in college football. And yeah, towards the back end, I think you saw both those cornerbacks play really meaningful downs against Florida. Granted, Florida didn't really have any of their pass catchers, but they looked really good. Pat Fields is great safety. And so I think this is the strongest defense Oklahoma's had in years. And I think their offense is going to be a juggernaut still with Spencer Rattler at the helm. So I look forward to watching that Oklahoma-Iowa State game. I think it's going to be a good one, and I'm interested to see when that line comes out, what it's going to be, and we'll for sure feature that game on the channel, because that'll be one of the better games you see in the Big 12. And so that kind of rounds out our two top our two horses that we think it's a 2-horse race. So Dill, who do you have as kind of like maybe a dark horse, or like another team that can make some noise in the Big 12?
I honestly really don't love any of the other teams in the Big 12. So it's like, I don't want to like necessarily say I'm looking for this team to be good coming into the year, but I do think Oklahoma State is returning a fairly good football team. And they weren't great last year by any stretch of the imagination, but they were pretty competitive. They did get blown out pretty good by Oklahoma, and at times really did look overmatched, but they're returning a lot of that defense and bringing back 10 seniors. So they're going to have experience there. I love Malcolm Rodriguez, the linebacker.
Yeah, he's a stud. I like
and
him. I like him much.
returning some guys on defensive line who can really play. So I do like that. And of course, Spencer Sanders. Now, last year, I wish he was more consistent. Like I seemed just like they had so many negative plays go either loss, turnovers, and those type of things really hurt an offense, especially when you're not bringing back any of the wideouts who can stretch the field, which they were able to do a little bit last year with Tylan Wallace and Dylan Stoner. So I do have concerns, but I do love Spencer Sanders. I think Jeff or Mike Gundy is a fairly good offensive coach. So I don't know if you're asking me to pick like the third. I do like what Oklahoma State has. I definitely don't love them. But I don't think the conference is very good outside of the top two. So
yeah, Oklahoma State's tough, especially Spencer Sanders, because I mean, I was a big Oklahoma State fan coming into the season last year. And I mean, Spencer Sanders had some injury problems, and really he has so much talent. He's just got to put it together. I mean, he's got a decent arm, but he's a tremendous athlete too. And we just didn't really see that all come together. Granted, they had just a weird offseason with Mike Gundy getting into it with some of the leaders on the team. Chuba Hubbard didn't really want to play, opted out. It was just kind of that season just never really got going for Oklahoma State. They didn't have a bad season. I want to say they won 8-3, and in the write up I said it's nothing to scoff at, but it's just that team. That team kind of reminded me of the Iowa State team that could have been this year, except the Iowa State team has some unity in it. But Oklahoma State just returned a lot of guys from the year before, and they just didn't really put it together. Chuba Hubbard was a significant disappointment. I mean, his draft stock just plummeted. So it is what it is. The team was disappointing. But yeah, Spencer Sanders is a stud, and I mean he can make some noise. I think if I'm giving you a team in the Big 12, I mean you have to talk about Texas. I think that's the most intriguing team to watch to me outside of the top two, because you got Steve Sarkisian coming in, who is probably the best, one of the best up there with Lane Kiffin, probably in offensive minds in football. What he did at Alabama was disgusting. That team just was absolutely humming, and he's going to have some really good guys to work around coming in this year. I think starting with Casey Thompson, who I think is going to edge out. I think it's Kalen Hurd, Hudson Card.
I would think for sure
Hudson
that
Card.
Thompson's going to be the guy.
I think Thompson will be the guy too. And then obviously, I mean, I said Breece Hall was the best running back in country. I'll take that back. They got Bijan Robinson, who was just so good last year. So we'll see what he can do with that Texas team. I know they have Jordan Whittington, who is a top 50 recruit in his class, who just hasn't really put it together either. But they got some talent on that team. Texas always recruits pretty well. And so I'm excited to see what Sark can bring to that offense.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, that team isn't I didn't think their offensive skill was good last year besides Bijan Robinson. I really thought Tariq Black and Brennan Eagles were if you don't have guys who can beat either of those two out, I don't love what you have coming. So yeah, Jordan Whittington was hurt and he didn't play when he was healthy much, and you'd like to think he can make a step, but it's hard to have much confidence in him.
Yeah.
I just don't know that having Bijan and Casey Thompson, two players I love.
Yeah, it's just
I just don't know that it's enough when you don't really have anyone at wideout who excites me. So
yeah, it's just not enough. I agree. And then you look to their defense, and you're just so many question marks. I mean, Juwan Mitchell, their leading tackler, transferred out to Tennessee. I think the only guy you really know much about is DeMarvin Overshown, who played a lot. He played decent. I mean, I know he's a good recruit. He didn't really always put it together. I think he finished with 58 tackles, but that was nothing too impressive. They obviously lose Joseph Osai, who's kind of the heart of that defense. Caden Stearns is gone. There's just not much to go off on this defense. It's not really making me exciting. And if this offense can't score points, I don't know how many wins they're going to stack in the Big 12.
Yeah, because they really last year could generate no pressure aside from Joseph Osai, and they're losing him and returning Coburn. But I didn't think he's not good enough to carry that D line. So
yeah,
I have major concerns about Texas. The Osai loss, I don't think, can be overstated, because he was the only guy who you watched last year and think that guy's a surefire NFL player. So I don't know. I do love Sarkisian coming in, but it will be his first year off after a really disappointing 5 years with Tom Herman, who I don't know. He didn't bring in teams that had any discipline. There was horrible tackling. Just like, I mean, we talk culture. I really didn't think they had it. And I don't know. It felt like they had that because they did recruit some guys, and they were always, aside from the 1 year they beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, a super disappointing team. So
Yeah,
I do like the future with Sarkisian. I really don't like them this year.
no,
So
I
that's kind of my thoughts on
I
them.
agree. I just wanted to give still our Longhorn fans some love. Give them
Yeah, no, it's a huge team. It's like you can't not talk about them because
yeah.
they're one of the top 5 programs in terms of generating buzz. So
Yeah, this is one of the more unbalanced years I think we've seen in the Big 12. Keep wanting to call them Big 10 now that there's only 10 teams, but I mean, you have Kansas, who's going to be. I like Coach Leopold coming in, but they're not going to be good this year. Kansas State. I mean, Skylar Thompson coming back, but I'm not that excited about them. They do have that running back Deuce Vaughn, who's a stud. So we'll see what they can do. I'm not that excited about them. And then Baylor's going to be a joke. There's just no answers at that quarterback spot. Texas Tech, I don't see much. So it's just there's like 4 or 5 teams who I just really don't see competing for many games. And then you got a couple like mid-tier teams like Texas, West Virginia, and TCU, and then you have the 2 dogs at the top.
TCU's always tough, but I don't know. It seems like Gary Patterson's run his course there. They just aren't doing anything anymore. Like they used to always be very competitive, and then for the last 5-6 years, it just feels like he's kind of losing that team. So I don't know. Maybe time for a switch out there and
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know how much
Abilene.
what better coach they'll get. You know what I mean? It's kind of the same thing we are talking about with Michigan. It's like if you fire Jim Harbaugh, like what coach out there are you gonna get that's like much better than Gary Patterson? He's been one of the more consistent coaches in the country for he's been there for like 20 plus years
Yeah,
as a
but he's
quarterback.
living on reputation. I do agree. Like 10 years ago, he was really good and really steady, but it doesn't seem like he had a similar Mike Gundy like incident with a player. And
Yeah.
I don't know. It just doesn't, it feels like his time's maybe past him. It's like at some point, Mac Brown had to leave Texas. It just, I don't know. When you're there for 20 years plus, it's really, really hard to maintain consistency unless you're I'm trying to think of guys like even Saban hasn't been there that long. Dabo, like just really tough to be a premier coach for 30 years or 20 years.
Yeah, it is. It is. And that's why you don't see many guys have 10-year plus stops at schools. It's hard to, especially as college football gets more lopsided with the talent. To close out the show, I'll give you one other team that I have my eye on. I mentioned them briefly, and that's West Virginia. We were talking pre-show. They return every single offensive producer on that team. So they're starting quarterbacks back after a pretty good year. He had a disappointing bowl game, but Jarrett Doge, I think that's how you say his last name, is he was phenomenal. I think he threw 14 touchdowns to only 4 interceptions. They get their 1,000-yard rusher back in Letty Brown. And then every single one of the receivers is back. I'm excited to see Winston Wright and Sam James kind of make some more noise so that you're keeping all that chemistry. And then at the defensive side of the ball, they were probably the best defense in the Big 12 last year. I think they were number 1 in scoring defense and number 1 in total yards given. And you have some guys who are really good. They still obviously lose Tony Fields, that linebacker who just was all over the place. I loved him in the NFL draft season. I thought he's a really good prospect. I think he'll be really
It's
good.
always so tough to replace those type of guys who are like your guy who's making almost every, especially when they're getting up with the number of tackles he was making.
Yeah.
It's so hard. Like you might think you have a good defense, but that's just almost irreplaceable because that's so many tackles to account for.
And they don't have like a guy that, I mean, they have like this, I think his name is Josh Chandler Semdo. It's like a hyphenated name. And he was decent on film, the games I watched, and he's coming over from the weak side linebacker spot. He'll play middle. You're right. I don't know if he'll be Tony Fields, but they have some other guys to really be excited about. Dante Stills and Akeem Mesidor at the D line spot. both very, very good players. And then Alonzo Ade at the safety spot, who I think had 2 interceptions and is going to be their leading returner and tackles. So they have some talent on that defense. And what I was kind of saying to you is if they can just take a step with that offense that was pretty good, but they're returning everybody. So you figure they're poised to kind of take that step. And then that defense, if it just doesn't take a significant step back, I think they can finish like 3rd or 4th in the Big 12 and compete pretty good, which is kind of something we're not used to seeing out of this West Virginia team.
You're right. They are going to need to score more when they played the big team, the big boys, the Oklahoma States and the Texas and Oklahoma, or Iowa State, I should say, not, but they really weren't scoring enough to give themselves a shot.
Yeah, here's the stat right here. They only allowed 20.5 points per game on defense, and they only allowed 159 yards through the air. I mean, that's no fly zone.
That's really good.
That's a really good freaking team on defense, and then they're returning everybody on offense. So, I mean, I'm not saying they're going to compete with Iowa State or Oklahoma, but they're a good ball club, good program, trending in the right direction, and I'm kind of interested to see how they rock and roll this year.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fair because they were a fairly competitive team. Obviously, are kind of ushering in a new era post Dana Holgerson, and we'll see what the new coach can bring in and see what they have. But
that one transfer from Tyke Smith, who's an All-American safety for them, transferred to Georgia. That's a big get for. I mean, the rich just keep getting richer for Georgia this year in the transfer portal, but yeah, that's a tough miss. I think that'll do it. I think. Is there any other guys, players, teams that you want to talk about? I'm trying to look at my notes.
No, I really don't think the others. I don't think any of the teams outside the teams we kind of mentioned are going to be much of a factor. I mean, Texas Tech, they'll always be able to score, but they don't play defense, so
I don't even
can't win with that.
They're one receiver who went over 300 yards last year, like broke his arm in 2 different places in the spring game, and is like, we're not even know if he'll play this year. I just like that team. That team might be in the basement outside of like Kansas, which they'll be in the basement forever. But
yeah, probably.
Yeah, I think I'm looking through. I guess like to round out a few Heisman guys, I think obviously Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall, Spencer Rattler. The Big 12 always has a chance to have Heisman guys because they're just so loaded and they score so much. Yeah, I think that'll do it though. So that's who we kind of have our outlook on the Big 12. We're gonna be doing the Big 10 next, so we'll watch a little film in the next couple of days, get our write-ups done, and then we'll probably later this weekend get the Big 10 done and out to you guys. Again, if you guys agree with our takes, disagree with our takes, we're always open in the comment section. I know you Florida Gator fans like to have a little argument, but thanks for listening. And if you guys like the content, please like and subscribe. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.
Also, one more thing. If you do want more on any specific team, just head over to the site, link in the bio.
That's
and
right.
There's write-ups for every team. So
yes, sir.
If you want to hear a little more about any of those deeper value teams outside of the top, you definitely can head over to the site. There's a little bit of a more deeper write-up on each team that maybe people aren't paying as much attention to if you think you can find some value there. So
absolutely. Thank you.
Head over there.
That's all right. We'll do. So we'll talk to you guys next time for the Big 10. Peace.